We're not on autopilot around here at the rundown because we have a couple of big stories that we wanted to take a little bit of a closer look at it, because I don't know if you know this or not, but it was a big couple of weeks for chip news. We're going to start off with the one that's happening this week, and that's going to be Intel Innovation 2022. There's lots of coverage of things that Intel's talking about. They've been showing off a lot of cool stuff, and no one's been showing it off more than our friend Pat Gelsinger. Now, if you recall, Pat Gelsinger's been on the job for just a little less than 2 years. You may recall the rundown episode where Steven had a cow when we figured out that Pat Gelsinger was going back to Intel. But he has been working tirelessly to keep Intel relevant in the IT market. This week's been kind of interesting because we've seen an admission that maybe Moore's Law isn't as dead as we thought it might be, but it might involve chiplets instead. We've also heard about the end of Optane, or the purported end of Optane. And then there's this anticipation for something called Sapphire Rapids, which hopefully somebody gets to take a look at pretty soon. So lots of buzz going on. Stephen, there's a lot that we have to discuss around what Intel's been talking about. But I want to start with something really simple. How does Intel look 2 years into the Pat era?
Yeah, and that's really what Intel Innovation 2022 was all about, was basically getting a look at what Mr. Gelsinger is doing with this company. And frankly, it looks pretty good. There's a lot of good stuff happening there. The thing that impressed me about Intel Innovation was, as crazy as it sounds, the optimism and humility of the whole thing. They admitted that AMD is ahead. They admitted that they were kind of maybe not asleep at the wheel, but maybe resting on some laurels when it came to having the latest chips, the latest process nodes, competing with AMD's products. Because I suspect that somebody within Intel said, AMD's not really going to be able to deliver on this. Let's just keep using things the way they were. Well, that's not how it turned out. And they admitted all this at the Intel Innovation Day. In fact, they were pretty forthright in saying, hey, we're behind on process nodes. We're behind on a lot of different product areas, but we're going to try to catch up. And then what they did was they laid out an optimistic and reasonable vision for where this goes. There are a lot of things in here. One of the fun things was an Intel Developer Cloud where you can actually use Sapphire Rapids right now if you're part of the invite-only crowd that was brought into that. They also are talking about, delivering Sapphire Rapids, delivering some of these next generation products. There was a lot of talk about GPUs and the ARC GPUs that are being shipped, the new next generation of client systems. But we're really focused on the enterprise, and that's really where the most interesting talk happened. One of the things that Intel is really leaning into is CXL. Intel created CXL when other companies were doing some other ways of integrating and disaggregated components into servers. Intel created CXL around PCI Express, and now CXL is basically taken over the world. Intel is very much delivering on their CXL promises. Now, some of that delivery happens in Sapphire Rapids, and we really need those parts in the market, but they're starting to deliver Sapphire Rapids as well. The other thing that Intel is doing is leaning into some of the other areas of the company. For example, FPGA. The FPGA group has really been slow to innovate. In fact, some of the original pre-Intel products are still out there shipping on really old process nodes. Well, that's all going away. They're going to have a whole new generation of FPGA products. They're going to rev everything from the cheapest to the most capable FPGAs. They're going to move them all to the more advanced process nodes and really take on the new AMD Xilinx combination in that market. The same thing is true of basically everything else Intel is doing. Silicon photonics. Intel is way ahead in silicon photonics, and they absolutely leaned into that at this Innovation Day. In fact, they did a wonderful silicon photonics demo from their lab for all the people that were gathered there. And silicon photonics is so important to the entire industry that I think I should point out that companies that sort of compete with Intel are actually using Intel's technology for that, simply because it's the only way to get high bandwidth in networking applications. And of course, silicon photonics also nicely dovetails with CXL and with this new chiplet architecture. So that's another thing that Intel leaned into. UCIe, which we've talked about here on the rundown. UCI Express. What you can think about with this is it's a way for companies to combine chiplets to make a custom processor. So imagine you are an OEM building a next generation network switch or storage device or even a server or something for the cloud. And you want, this many high performance CPU cores and this much, AI ML engine, and you want some silicon photonics IO, you want some CXL capability in there. Maybe you also want to combine and mix and match from different vendors. Well, that's what UCI Express is promising. So imagine that CPU has, I don't know, like um, ARM cores and Intel Silicon Photonics and NVIDIA ML engine and maybe an AMD GPU all in one core or one chip. Well, you can do that. You'll be able to do that. And Intel is going to be building these chips for customers. They're going to be fabbing these chips. They're going to be working with TSMC and Samsung and others to bring all this stuff to market. And that really is pretty exciting because what it does is it takes away all of the things that people were complaining about Intel. Oh, they're behind on this, they're behind on that, they're behind on the other. Well, all those things are kind of wiped away. And now there's a new Intel in town that works with other companies that has standards instead of proprietary products that tries to make the best of different IP, that embraces ARM, that embraces all these other companies. And that for me was the message that I got from Innovation Day.
So I want to take off my Gelsinger fanboy hat for just a second because let's be fair, we all love Pat. He's a great human being and he's a geek, just like us. And I want to talk about Gelsinger, the manager, for just a moment because let's compare Pat to his predecessor, Bob Swan, who was the former CFO before he took the reins. To me, the single-minded focus that Pat Gelsinger has put on Intel over the last 2 years is probably the most important thing. When you're a CFO, you deal in dollars and cents. And so what happens is you look at this market and you go, well, I could take a little bit of market share from these people over here and I might be able to get involved with something over there. And you spread out and maybe you stop thinking about being the best chip maker in the world and you think about being an okay provider of stuff all over the place. And if you're one of those folks that's gone into the store recently and seen somebody's brand name that you used to know as like a, I don't know, like a keyboard manufacturer, but now it's on mice and headphones and trackpads and I don't know, like water bottles. You're like, what are you guys doing? Like, why are you putting out these mediocre products just to get your name out there? Aha. Now you're talking about somebody who doesn't really care about the value of what they produce as much as how much of it they can produce at a time. And then Pat steps in and goes, what are we doing, guys? Like, why are we doing all of these other things and not focusing on the stuff that made us famous? Like the Intel Inside campaign. Remember when that was the most important decision that you could make in a computer was whether or not it was running an Intel chip and you had something you could build off of and you knew what it could do and you were happy with its capabilities? Does it even matter anymore? Should it matter? I think when Pat stepped in, he said, yeah, it should. It should absolutely matter to the companies that are using our products, that Intel Inside should still matter. But in order to do that, we have to be better at what we build. And the landscape of technology today is radically different than it was even just 3 years ago. And so, in order to make that important, even absent the chip shortage, you have to build the best stuff and you have to put the best stuff together to make better stuff. And I love that that's what Intel's trying to do. And yes, it means that we're going to curtail some product lines. Yes, it means we're going to have to reorganize things. Yeah, it means we're going to have to politic to try to get chip fabs built here in the US so that our companies can produce those chips. And we got to play catch up all over the place. And Intel realizes this. And maybe that is the key. Maybe Intel stepping up to the stage and going, hey guys, we're behind. Maybe not by a lot, but we're behind and we need to be better. And we need to use that competition to drive us forward, to be better, to put out the best stuff, is the first admission in a long chain of building Intel back to be a dominant player in the market. No one would argue that they're not a dominant player in the market, but things are always better when there are two companies duking it out and fighting to be the best at something, as opposed to a company who feels that they have market dominance going, we're bored. Let's build something that we can put our name on that'll be okay for a while because we're so good at everything else, nobody can stop us. That's usually when they sneak up behind you and pass you without realizing it. So I'm excited to see what Intel has to say. I'm hoping that we're going to see Sapphire Rapids pretty soon. And one of the big announcements that came out was this Intel Developer Cloud, where companies can start getting special access to start building on chips, which I think is something that has been needed because it allows the developers to build for future architectures, but also to give Intel feedback on things that they're seeing that need to be fixed before those chips can go live to the fabs. That's a huge way for Intel to kind of position themselves in a forward facing direction, because what it effectively means is that the companies are building apps to run on Intel chips before they're released. It means that Intel is going to have special optimizations ready to go as soon as those chips hit the market so that they can talk about how important it is to be running those chips. Time will tell, as it always does. But with Pat behind the wheel, I think maybe the future's a little bit brighter and a little less scattered.